When I saw my husband scrolling through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, but not from fear of being caught. It was from knowing what he would see in those messages. The ones I forgot to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he smoothly pulled it back and kept reading. I watched his face change as he read line by line, feeling my life crumble in mere seconds. Yes, now he would learn the truth. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he scrolled further, and I knew, right now, he was about to reach that message that would destroy my life. The one that would explain everything and put a final period. Or maybe confuse him even more. My phone suddenly vibrated in his hands, and a new notification appeared on the screen. I saw his face go pale as he read the sender's name. My husband froze. Didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I'm nervous. My nerves mixed with the horror of realizing what I had done. His breathing quickened. I could hear it even from the 6 feet separating us. This was exactly what I feared most. Because 3 months ago I made a mistake that changed absolutely everything forever, and now. I didn't know what to do, but let me tell you how it really was. Before I share with you the secret I tried so hard to hide for so long, write in the comments what city you're watching this video from, and also answer this question: have you ever had a secret you tried to hide with all your might, but in the end, you couldn't succeed? I've spent 15 years of my life helping couples save their marriages. 15 years sitting in my tastefully decorated office, watching tears fall onto expensive tissues, listening to confessions that would make a priest blush. I thought I'd heard it all, seen every variation of human weakness and desire. I was wrong. My name is Laura, and I'm what people in my suburban Connecticut town call successful. At 46, I have the kind of life that looks perfect from the outside: a thriving therapy practice, a beautiful colonial home with white shutters and a garden that could grace magazine covers, and a husband who still opens car doors for me after 20 years of marriage. David is a good man. Not exciting, perhaps, but good in the way that comfortable shoes are good, reliable, supportive, never causing pain. He's a corporate lawyer who works long hours and comes home to kiss my forehead while I'm reading case notes in our king-sized bed. Our routine is as predictable as sunrise: coffee together at 7, quick goodbye kiss, texts about dinner plans, evening news while eating on TV trays because we're too tired for proper conversation. It wasn't always like this. Once, we stayed up until dawn talking about everything and nothing. Once, he surprised me with weekend trips to small bed and breakfasts where we'd make love with the windows open. But that was before careers consumed us, before we settled into the comfortable numbness that successful couples mistake for contentment. I tell my clients that marriages go through seasons. What I don't tell them is that sometimes winter lasts so long you forget what spring feels like. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was reviewing notes for my 9 o'clock session when David appeared in my home office doorway, already dressed in his navy suit, coffee mug in hand. "I forgot to mention yesterday," he said, straightening his tie in the antique mirror I'd hung to catch morning light. "Toby's coming to stay with us for a while." I looked up from Mrs. Patterson's file, another case of emotional distance, another couple sleepwalking through their marriage. "Toby Richardson? Your old colleague? His divorce was finalized last week. He's pretty broken up about it." David's reflection met my eyes in the mirror. "I thought you might be able to help him. You know, professionally." There it was, the assumption that I could fix anything broken, heal any wounded soul that wandered into our orbit. David's faith in my abilities was touching and exhausting in equal measure. "How long is a while?" I asked, closing the file. "A month, maybe 2. Until he gets back on his feet." David turned from the mirror, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "You don't mind, do you? I know how you feel about house guests." I minded. I minded having my carefully orchestrated routine disrupted, having a stranger intrude on the delicate balance David and I had achieved. But David was asking, really asking, not just informing, and that was rare enough to deserve consideration. Of course not, I heard myself say. When does he arrive? Tonight. I'll pick him up from the train station after work. After David left, I sat in my office trying to remember Toby Richardson. I had vague memories of a tall man with dark hair and an easy laugh, someone who'd been David's colleague years ago before moving to California. They'd stayed in touch sporadically, Christmas cards, the occasional phone call, but I hadn't seen him since our wedding 20 years ago. My first client arrived, and I pushed thoughts of house guests aside. But throughout the day, as I guided couples through their various crises, I found myself wondering what kind of man emerges from divorce broken up enough to need temporary refuge. In my experience, men who sought such arrangements were either genuinely devastated or skilled manipulators looking for sympathy and shelter. Professional curiosity, I told myself. Nothing more. By evening, I'd convinced myself that having Toby stay with us might even be beneficial. I could study closehand how men process divorce, gather insights for my practice. It would be like having a live-in case study. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard David's car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched two figures emerge from his BMW. David looked the same as always, slightly rumpled, briefcase in one hand, keys in the other. But the man beside him made me pause mid-chop. Toby Richardson had aged well. Better than well, actually. Where 20 years had softened David's jawline and thinned his hair, they had only refined Toby's features, adding silver to his temples and interesting lines around his eyes. He moved with the kind of confident grace that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin, not the bearing of a broken man. I found myself smoothing my sweater and checking my reflection in the kitchen window before they reached the door. "Laura, you remember Toby," David said as they entered the kitchen, bringing with them the crisp October air and something else, an energy that seemed to fill the room. "Of course," I said, extending my hand. "Though I have to admit, you look remarkably well for someone going through a difficult time." Toby's handshake was firm, his skin warm. He held my gaze a moment longer than necessary, and I saw something flicker in his dark eyes, amusement, perhaps, or recognition of some kind. 20 years of California living, he said. It's amazing what sunshine can do for a person's appearance. Though I'm afraid the benefits don't extend to emotional health. His voice was different than I remembered, deeper, with a slight roughness that suggested either too many cigarettes or too much shouting. Or crying. "I'm sorry about your divorce," I said, meaning it. "David mentioned you're having a difficult time." David's being kind. "I'm a complete mess, actually." But Toby smiled as he said it, the kind of self-deprecating smile that was supposed to deflect sympathy while inviting it. "I hope I won't be too much trouble." "None at all," I assured him, though I was already rearranging my mental furniture to accommodate this unexpected presence. Over dinner, I watched Toby carefully. It's an occupational hazard, I can't help but analyze people, looking for the tells that reveal their true emotional state. What I saw confused me. Toby spoke about his divorce with what seemed like genuine sadness, but there was something performative about it, as if he were reading from a script he'd memorized. 22 years, he was saying, pushing around the salmon I'd prepared. You think you know someone after 22 years, but apparently I didn't know anything at all. What happened? David asked. You never really explained in your emails. Toby was quiet for a moment, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, genuinely curious about his answer. She fell in love with someone else, he said finally. Her yoga instructor, if you can believe the cliché. Said I'd become emotionally unavailable, that we'd been living like roommates for years. He looked up at me. Sound familiar, Dr. Morrison? I imagine you hear variations of this story quite often. There was something in the way he said Dr. Morrison that made my pulse quicken. Not mocking, exactly, but aware, as if he knew exactly what effect his words might have. More often than I'd like, I admitted. Though usually it's the women who feel emotionally abandoned. Progressive California, Toby said with that same enigmatic smile. We're very forward-thinking about gender roles. David launched into a story about one of his own cases, but I found myself watching Toby's hands as he ate. Long fingers, no tan line where a wedding ring should be. When had he stopped wearing it? How long had he been preparing for this particular performance? After dinner, David retreated to his study to finish some work, leaving Toby and me to clean up. We moved around my kitchen with surprising ease, he washing while I dried, our conversation flowing from divorce statistics to California weather to the art hanging on my walls. You have excellent taste, he said, nodding toward a small Rothko print I'd splurged on years ago. Color studies have always fascinated me. The way different hues can evoke such specific emotional responses. I paused in drying a wine glass. You know Rothko? I spent my divorce proceedings sitting in museums, he said. Amazing how much you can learn about art when you're trying to avoid lawyers. There was something electric in the air between us, a charge I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was simple intellectual stimulation. It had been so long since someone had discussed art with me, since someone had noticed the details I cared about. The gallery downtown is featuring a new exhibition, I heard myself say. Contemporary interpretations of abstract expressionism. David's not much for art, but if you're interested. I'd love to go, Toby said immediately. When? They're open until 9 on Fridays. David usually works late anyway. We were standing close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive that was nothing like David's predictable aftershave. Close enough to see that his eyes weren't just brown but had flecks of gold in them. It's a date then, he said, and though the words were casual, something in his tone made them feel significant. Friday came faster than I expected. I found myself changing clothes 3 times, settling finally on a black dress that was professional but flattering. David barely looked up from his laptop when I announced I was going to the gallery. With the house guest, he asked absently. With Toby, yes. I thought it might be therapeutic for him. David nodded, already lost in whatever brief he was reviewing. Good idea. Poor guy needs distractions. The gallery was nearly empty when we arrived, just a few serious-looking art students making notes in expensive sketchbooks. Toby moved through the space with genuine appreciation, stopping before each piece, asking thoughtful questions about technique and meaning. This one, he said, pausing before a particularly vibrant canvas, reminds me of something. The way the red bleeds into the blue, it's like watching a sunset through tears. I looked at him sharply. There was real pain in his voice, the first genuine emotion I'd heard from him since he'd arrived. Tell me about her, I said softly. Sarah? He was quiet for a long moment. She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, successful, socially connected. But somewhere along the way, I realized I'd fallen in love with the idea of her rather than who she actually was. And who was she actually? Lonely. Just like me. We were standing very close now, the pretense of studying art forgotten. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see my reflection in his eyes. Laura, he said, and my name sounded different in his voice than it ever had in David's. I should have stepped back. Should have remembered who I was, where I was, what I stood to lose. Instead, I found myself leaning closer. We kissed. It wasn't passionate or desperate or any of the things you might expect. It was gentle, questioning, like a conversation conducted without words. But it lasted long enough for me to remember what desire felt like, long enough for my carefully constructed world to tilt on its axis. When we broke apart, I was trembling. "I should go," I whispered. "Should you?" I looked into his eyes and saw something that terrified me, not just desire, but understanding. As if he could see straight through all my professional competence and suburban respectability to the woman underneath who was starving for something she couldn't even name. "Yes," I said, but I didn't move. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, the air between us crackling with possibility and danger. Finally, I forced myself to step back, to remember who I was supposed to be. The drive home was silent, but the silence felt full rather than empty. When we reached the house, David was already asleep, the study dark. Toby and I stood in the foyer, neither wanting to be the first to break the spell. "Good night, Laura," he said finally. "Good night." But as I lay in bed listening to David's steady breathing, I knew that nothing would ever be good about night again. Because now I had a secret, and secrets, as I told my clients every day, were corrosive things that ate away at the foundations of even the strongest marriages. What I didn't know yet was that this was exactly what Toby was counting on. I woke up the next morning with the strange sensation of being a different person than I'd been 24 hours before. The face in my bathroom mirror looked the same, shoulder-length auburn hair showing the first threads of silver, green eyes that my mother had always called my best feature, skin that was holding up reasonably well for 46. But something fundamental had shifted overnight. I'd kissed another man. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, I had wanted someone who wasn't my husband. David was already downstairs making coffee, dressed for his Saturday morning golf game with his law partners. He kissed my cheek absently when I entered the kitchen, the same perfunctory gesture he'd performed every morning for the past 5 years. "Sleep well?" he asked, not really listening for an answer as he scrolled through emails on his phone. "Fine," I lied, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd made. "What time will you be home?" "Late. Jim wants to grab dinner after golf, discuss the Morrison case." He looked up briefly. "You don't mind, do you? I know we planned to work in the garden today." I should have minded. We'd been planning to plant the spring bulbs for weeks, one of the few activities we still enjoyed together. But all I felt was relief at the prospect of avoiding David's company, avoiding the weight of his trust and affection when I felt so fundamentally dishonest. "Of course not," I said. "I have case notes to review anyway." After he left, I found myself moving restlessly through the house, unable to settle. Where was Toby? I hadn't heard him come upstairs last night, hadn't heard any movement from the guest room this morning. The rational part of my mind hoped he'd left early, maybe taken a walk to clear his head. But another part, a part one was trying very hard to ignore, was disappointed not to see him. I was reorganizing my spice cabinet for the third time when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair damp from a shower, wearing jeans and a gray sweater that somehow made his eyes look darker. "Morning," he said, his voice careful, neutral. "I hope I didn't wake you." "Not at all." "Coffee?" I gestured toward the pot, grateful for something normal to do with my hands. "Please." We moved around each other cautiously, like two people trying to pretend they hadn't shared something significant. I handed him a mug, one of the good ones, I noticed, not the chipped ceramic David used for his weekend coffee. "About last night," I began, then stopped. What was I going to say? That it was a mistake? That it couldn't happen again? Both true, but somehow the words felt inadequate. "You don't need to explain anything," Toby said. "I understand the position you're in." But did he? Did he understand that I'd lain awake until 3 in the morning trying to dissect what had happened, applying every therapeutic technique I knew to my own behavior? Did he understand that I'd felt more alive during those 10 seconds in the gallery than I had in months of going through the motions of my perfectly acceptable life? I don't usually, I started again. I know. He was looking directly at me now, and I had the unsettling feeling that he really did know, that somehow he could see things about me that I barely admitted to myself. You're not the kind of woman who has affairs. The word hung between us like an accusation. Affair. As if we'd done something more than share a single kiss. As if we were already guilty of something neither of us had quite admitted wanting. It wasn't an affair, I said quickly. It was just a moment. A mistake. Was it? The question was gentle, but it hit me like a physical blow. Because the honest answer was that I didn't know anymore. I didn't know if it was a mistake or the first real thing I'd done in years. I should probably find somewhere else to stay, Toby said when I didn't answer. This situation is obviously complicated for you. No. The word came out faster than I'd intended, surprising us both. I mean, David would ask questions if you left suddenly. He'd want to know why. It was a reasonable explanation, but we both knew it wasn't the real reason I didn't want him to leave. The real reason was that I wanted to explore this dangerous new territory, wanted to see where this path might lead even though I knew it ended in destruction. Besides, I added, you're here to heal. That's what David thinks, anyway. That's what I'm supposed to help you do. And what do you think? I studied his face, looking for signs of the devastation he claimed to be experiencing. What I saw instead was a man who seemed remarkably composed for someone whose 22-year marriage had just ended. Alert. Almost predatory. I think, I said slowly, that you're not as broken as you want everyone to believe. Something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps, or respect. You're very perceptive, Dr. Morrison. There it was again, that particular way he said my title. Not mocking, but aware of the irony. Here I was, the marriage counselor, the expert on relationships, and I was standing in my kitchen feeling more confused about my own life than any of my clients. It's my job to be perceptive, I said. Is that what this is? A job? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from David, running late. Don't wait dinner. The relief I felt was immediate and intense, followed quickly by guilt. David's working late, I said, not looking at Toby. I see. We spent the day dancing around each other, maintaining careful distance while being hyper-aware of every movement, every glance. I tried to work on case notes, but found myself reading the same paragraph over and over. Toby claimed to be reading a book in the living room, but I caught him watching me through the doorway more than once. By evening, the tension was almost unbearable. I made dinner for two, telling myself it was simple courtesy. We ate mostly in silence, the conversation stilted and careful. But underneath the polite surface, I could feel something building, a pressure that demanded release. After dinner, I found myself suggesting we watch a movie. Another perfectly innocent activity that felt charged with significance. We settled on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us feeling both vast and insignificant. Halfway through some romantic comedy I'd chosen precisely because it was bland and unthreatening, Toby spoke. Can I ask you something, Laura? I nodded, not trusting my voice. When was the last time David surprised you? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? When did he last do something unexpected? Say something that made you see him differently? I opened my mouth to defend my husband, to list his good qualities and our shared history. Instead, I found myself thinking. Really thinking. When had David last surprised me? When had he last made me feel anything other than comfortable affection? I can't remember, I admitted finally. And when was the last time you surprised yourself? Now he was looking at me directly, and I felt exposed, as if he could see every compromise I'd made, every dream I'd carefully buried under the weight of respectability and routine. "Last night," I whispered. "Good," he said, and somehow that single word contained more approval than I'd felt from David in years. We finished the movie in silence, but something had shifted again. By the time the credits rolled, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a landscape I didn't recognize. "I should go to bed," I said, though it was barely 10 o'clock. "Should you?" It was the same question he'd asked in the gallery, delivered with the same gentle challenge. This time, I met his gaze directly. "No," I said. "I probably shouldn't." But I went anyway, climbing the stairs to the bedroom I shared with David, lying down in sheets that smelled like fabric softener and 18 years of shared sleep. Outside, I could hear October wind in the trees, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. And somewhere in the house below, Toby was awake too. I was sure of it. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that wanting him was only part of what was happening to me. The larger truth was that he was making me want things, not just physical intimacy, but intellectual connection, emotional intensity, the feeling of being truly seen by another person. David would be home soon, would slip into bed beside me and perhaps reach for me in the automatic way of long-married couples. And I would respond in the same automatic way, going through motions that had once been meaningful. But everything was different now. I was different now. And somehow, I suspected that was exactly what Toby had been counting on. I woke Monday morning with the strange certainty that Toby had been right, he had been counting on my transformation. The thought should have alarmed me, but instead it filled me with a peculiar sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, I didn't know exactly what my day would bring, and that uncertainty felt more like promise than threat. David left early for depositions, kissing my forehead in his usual distracted way. I heard him exchange pleasantries with Toby in the hallway, something about coffee and the weather, and marveled at how normal it all sounded. How easily deception could masquerade as ordinary life. My first client was Mrs. Patterson again, back for what I suspected would be our final session. She sat across from me in her usual chair, tissues at the ready, preparing to dissect her marriage with the clinical precision I'd taught her. "Robert brought me flowers yesterday," she said, her voice carrying the tone of someone reporting a symptom. "Grocery store daisies. He hasn't done that in 3 years. 6 months ago, I would have labeled this progress, would have guided her toward gratitude and renewed connection. Instead, I found myself asking, how did that make you feel?" "Guilty," she admitted. Because all I could think was how little effort it represented. How he'd probably grabbed them while buying milk, as an afterthought. I leaned forward, suddenly seeing Mrs. Patterson with new clarity. "When was the last time Robert surprised you?" "Really surprised you?" She blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. It was exactly what Toby had asked me about David. I can't remember," she said slowly. "And when was the last time you surprised yourself?" Mrs. Patterson stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression, a recognition, perhaps, that we were no longer talking about her husband's failings but about her own unrealized possibilities. "I don't think I ever have," she whispered. The session ran over by 20 minutes, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was actually helping someone rather than simply processing their complaints. When Mrs. Patterson left, she walked differently, straighter, more purposeful. I canceled my afternoon appointments, claiming a migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie, my head was pounding with the effort of maintaining professional composure when everything inside me felt electric and unstable. At home, I found Toby in my study, reading one of my books on marriage counseling. He looked up when I entered, and something in my expression must have given me away because he closed the book immediately. "Rough day?" he asked. Enlightening, I said, settling into the chair across from him. I've been thinking about what you said. About surprising myself. And? I think I've been sleepwalking through my own life. The admission hung between us, more intimate than any physical touch. Toby set down my book and gave me his full attention, the kind of focused presence I'd forgotten was possible. Tell me about it, he said. So I did. I told him about the comfortable numbness of my marriage, about going through therapeutic motions with clients while avoiding any real examination of my own emotional state. I told him about the dreams I'd had in graduate school, to write, to travel, to make a real difference in people's lives, and how I'd gradually replaced them with the safer goals of financial security and social respectability. He listened without judgment, asking questions that made me think rather than simply answer. By the time we were done talking, the sun was setting, painting my study in shades of gold and amber. I should start dinner, I said, though neither of us moved. Should you? This time, when he asked the question, I knew it meant something different. This time, I understood that he was asking me to choose, not just about dinner, but about what kind of person I wanted to be. No, I said. I shouldn't. We ordered Chinese food instead, eating it straight from the containers while sitting on the kitchen floor like teenagers. When David called to say he'd be working until midnight, I felt nothing but relief. Later, as we cleaned up, Toby and I moved around each other with increasing awareness. Every accidental touch sent electricity through my body. When he reached past me to put something in the dishwasher, his sleeve brushed my arm, and I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Laura, he said softly, and I turned to find him standing very close. This is dangerous, I whispered. I know. I could lose everything. You could gain everything too. He reached up and touched my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. I closed my eyes and leaned into the touch, feeling more alive than I had in years. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. Neither do I, he said. But I know I haven't felt this way in a very long time. When he kissed me this time, it wasn't gentle or questioning. It was full of purpose, full of the hunger I'd been trying to deny. I kissed him back with 20 years of stored passion, 20 years of careful control finally breaking apart. We kissed. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, could see my reflection in his dark eyes. We should stop, I said, but I made no move to step away. Should we? The question was becoming our refrain, our way of acknowledging choice without taking responsibility for it. But this time, I didn't answer with words. Instead, I reached for him again, and he met me halfway. The evening dissolved into a series of moments, conversations that lasted hours, silences that felt full rather than empty, touches that never quite crossed the line but came dangerously close. By the time David's headlights swept across the kitchen window, we had been sitting innocently at opposite ends of the couch for exactly 3 minutes. As I listened to my husband's key in the lock, I realized that I had crossed a different kind of line entirely. Not a physical one, but something more fundamental. I had stopped being the woman who belonged to David and become someone else entirely, someone capable of wanting things I had no right to want. Someone capable of taking them. Tuesday passed in a haze of anticipation and guilt. David noticed nothing unusual, but I caught myself watching the clock, calculating how many hours until he would leave for his weekly poker game with college friends. Toby and I maintained careful distance during the day, but the air between us hummed with possibility. I tried to focus on my clients, but found myself projecting my own situation onto every case. A young couple struggling with trust issues made me think about the elaborate deception I was constructing. A woman contemplating divorce made me wonder what I was really contemplating myself. During lunch, I called David's office under the pretense of confirming his evening plans. Still poker night? I asked, hating how casual I sounded. Of course. Why? No reason. I thought I might work late in my study. Case notes. Sounds good. Don't wait up, you know how these games run. I hung up feeling nauseated by my own behavior. This was how affairs began, I realized, not with grand gestures of passion, but with small lies, careful scheduling, the gradual construction of parallel lives. By 7 o'clock, David was gone, and I found myself alone with Toby for an entire evening. The house felt different without David's presence, larger somehow, full of possibilities that daylight had kept hidden. I was in my study when Toby knocked on the doorframe. He'd changed into jeans and a dark sweater that made his eyes look almost black. Working hard, he asked. Pretending to work hard, I corrected. I haven't been able to concentrate on anything today. Neither have I. He stepped into the room, and I felt the familiar electricity that seemed to follow him everywhere. My study suddenly felt too small, too intimate, with its soft lighting and comfortable chairs. We need to talk, I said. Do we? About what's happening between us. About what it means. Toby sat down across from my desk, his expression serious. What do you think it means? I think it means I'm about to destroy my marriage. Is that what you want? The question hit me like a physical blow. Was it what I wanted? To lose David, to lose the life we'd built together, to lose my reputation and standing in the community? I don't know, I admitted. 6 months ago, the answer would have been absolutely not. But now? Now I'm not sure I ever really chose this life. I think it just happened to me, one compromise at a time. Toby leaned forward, his eyes intense. So choose now. Consciously. What do you want, Laura? I looked at him sitting in my chair, in my study, in my house, and felt the ground shift beneath my feet. What did I want? To feel alive again. To be seen, really seen, by someone who understood not just my professional competence but my hidden desires. To stop being so careful, so controlled, so responsible for everyone else's happiness while ignoring my own. I want to feel like myself again, I said. And who is that? I don't know. I think I lost her somewhere along the way. Maybe I can help you find her. He stood and moved around the desk until he was standing beside my chair. When he held out his hand, I took it without hesitation. He pulled me to my feet, and we stood there for a moment, the weight of decision hanging between us. Are you sure? He asked. I thought about David at his poker game, laughing with friends who knew him as the successful lawyer with the successful wife. I thought about my clients, who trusted me to guide them through their relationship crises while I manufactured my own. I thought about the woman I'd been that morning, and the woman I was becoming. No, I said. I'm not sure about anything anymore. But I'm tired of being careful. He smiled then, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from him. Good, he said. Careful is overrated. What happened next felt both inevitable and impossible. We moved through my house like sleepwalkers, turning off lights, checking locks, performing the mundane rituals of ending a day while something extraordinary built between us. In the hallway outside the guest room, we stopped. This was the moment of final choice, the point where whatever happened next would change everything. I should go to my room, I said. Should you? This time, I didn't answer with words. This time, I opened the door to the guest room and stepped inside. We spent the night together. I woke before dawn, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why my body felt so different, sated and alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Then memory returned, and with it, a complex flood of emotions. Joy and terror. Satisfaction and guilt. The feeling of having found something I didn't know I'd lost, coupled with the knowledge that finding it might cost me everything else. Beside me, Toby was still sleeping, his face peaceful in the gray morning light. I studied his features, trying to reconcile this tender stranger with the man who had systematically dismantled my careful life. What had I done? What were we doing? I slipped from the bed and gathered my scattered clothes, dressing quickly in the dim light. In the hallway, I paused, listening for sounds of David's return. Nothing. According to the clock on the wall, it was barely 5 a.m. Poker nights sometimes ran until dawn, especially when David was winning. In my own bedroom, I climbed into the bed I shared with my husband and lay staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled like fabric softener and routine, nothing like the guest room that now held evidence of my transformation. When David finally came home an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. He slipped into bed beside me with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse, and I felt the weight of his consideration like a physical ache. He was a good man. That had never been the problem. As I lay there listening to David settle into sleep, I tried to feel guilty about what I'd done. Instead, all I felt was a deep, overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The thought terrified me. The next morning arrived with all the brutal clarity of a hangover. I woke to find David already dressed and making coffee, humming tunelessly as he prepared for another day of depositions. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal after the night I'd experienced. "Good morning, beautiful," he said when I appeared in the kitchen, dropping a kiss on my forehead. "You were sleeping so soundly I didn't want to wake you." Beautiful. When was the last time he'd called me that? When was the last time I'd felt beautiful? Last night, I realized with a sharp pang of something that might have been guilt if it weren't so tangled up with satisfaction. "How was poker?" I asked, pouring myself coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "Profitable. Won enough to take you somewhere nice for dinner this weekend." He smiled, pleased with himself. "Maybe that new French place you mentioned." The casual kindness of the gesture hit me like a blow. Here was my husband, planning romantic dinners while I was constructing elaborate deceptions. The woman I'd been a week ago would have been touched by his thoughtfulness. The woman I was becoming felt trapped by it. "That sounds lovely," I managed. After David left, I found myself alone in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the window over the sink. I looked the same as always, a successful professional woman in her mid-40s, well-maintained and respectable. But behind my eyes, I could see someone else entirely. Someone reckless and alive and utterly foreign to the life I'd built. Toby appeared in the doorway as if summoned by my thoughts. He was dressed casually, hair still damp from the shower, and the sight of him sent an immediate jolt of recognition through my body. My skin remembered his touch, my mouth remembered his taste. "Good morning," he said carefully, and I could hear the question in his voice. Would I regret what had happened? Would I retreat into guilt and propriety? "Good morning," I replied, and something in my tone must have reassured him because his posture relaxed. We moved around each other with new awkwardness, the easy intimacy of the night before replaced by daylight uncertainty. What were the rules now? How did people navigate the morning after they'd irreversibly changed their lives? "Any regrets?" he asked as I refilled my coffee cup. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret crossing a line I'd spent 20 years respecting? Did I regret betraying David's trust? Did I regret discovering that I was capable of wanting something beyond the safe boundaries of my marriage? "No," I said, surprised by how quickly the answer came. "You?" "None." We stood there looking at each other, and I felt the dangerous pull of possibility. It would be so easy to cross the kitchen, to touch him again, to let desire override the practical considerations that were already beginning to crowd my thoughts. Instead, I forced myself to step back. I need to think, I said. About what this means. About what happens next. Toby nodded, understanding. Take all the time you need. But as I tried to focus on my work that day, I realized that time was exactly what I didn't have. My first client was a woman whose husband had discovered her affair through credit card statements and hotel receipts. As she sobbed in my office, describing the devastation in his eyes when he confronted her, I felt like I was looking into my own possible future. I never meant for it to go so far, she wept. It started so innocently. Just coffee, just conversations. But somehow it became something more, I finished. She nodded, gratitude mixing with anguish on her face. Exactly. And now everything is ruined. 25 years of marriage, gone. My children won't speak to me. I've lost everything that mattered. I handed her tissues and made appropriate therapeutic responses, but inside I was calculating. How long before David noticed changes in my behavior? How long before I slipped up, said the wrong thing, left evidence of my deception? My second client was even worse, a man whose wife had left him for his best friend. The betrayal, he said, his voice hollow. It's not just that she cheated. It's that she chose someone I trusted. Someone who sat at my dinner table, who knew my children, who I considered family. By the time my appointments ended, I felt sick with the weight of what I'd done. Not just the affair itself, but the magnitude of deception it would require to maintain. Every conversation with David would now be an act of betrayal. Every normal moment would be built on lies. At home, I found Toby reading in the living room. He looked up when I entered, and I saw concern flicker across his features. Rough day, he asked. Illuminating, I said, echoing our conversation from Monday. But this time, the illumination felt harsh and unforgiving. I told him about my clients, about the wreckage affairs left in their wake. He listened without defensiveness, letting me work through my fears and guilt. So what are you saying? He asked when I finished. That you want to pretend last night never happened? I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I want anymore. Yes, you do, he said gently. You're just afraid to admit it. He was right, and that terrified me. Because what I wanted was him. Not just the physical connection, but the intellectual intimacy, the feeling of being truly seen and understood. I wanted the woman I became in his presence, bold, passionate, uncompromising. But wanting something and being able to have it were entirely different things. I need time, I said again. How much time? I don't know. Toby studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. But Laura? Yes? Don't take so long that you forget who you really are. That evening, David came home with flowers, not grocery store daisies, but a beautiful arrangement from the expensive florist downtown. He'd also picked up wine and ingredients for my favorite pasta dish. What's the occasion? I asked, genuinely surprised. No occasion. I just realized it's been a while since I did something nice for you. The timing was cruel. Here was my husband, making an effort, trying to be romantic, just as I was discovering how little romance there was left between us. I watched him cook, listened to him talk about his day, and felt like an actress playing a role I'd outgrown. Over dinner, he reached across the table and took my hand. You seem different lately, he said. Happier, somehow. More relaxed. The irony was suffocating. Do I? Yes. It's nice. I was worried you were getting burned out with work, but you seem more energetic. More like yourself. More like myself. If only he knew how right he was, and how wrong. That night, as David reached for me in bed, I responded with the automatic compliance of 20 years of marriage. But my mind was elsewhere, my body still humming with sense memory of a very different kind of touch. Afterward, as David settled into sleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Down the hall, Toby was probably awake too, and the knowledge of his presence felt like electricity in my veins. I was trapped between two lives now, the safe, respectable existence I'd built with David, and the dangerous possibility that Toby represented. I couldn't have both, and I wasn't sure I could give up either. What I didn't realize yet was that the choice might not be mine to make. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice was whispering that this had all been too easy, too perfect. That men like Toby didn't just happen into situations like ours without reason. But I was too intoxicated by my own transformation to listen. "Good morning," I replied, and something in my tone must have reassured him because his posture relaxed slightly. But the relief was short-lived, because in that moment of connection, I heard David's car in the driveway. "He forgot something," I whispered, panic flooding my system. Toby was already moving, slipping out the back door as I heard David's key in the front lock. I busied myself at the counter, arranging fruit that didn't need arranging, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Forgot my briefing notes," David called from the hallway. "Can't present the Morrison case without them." I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of papers shuffling in his study, the mundane noises of a man retrieving forgotten documents. When he came back downstairs, I was standing exactly where a faithful wife should be, coffee cup in hand, expression appropriately domestic. "See you tonight," he said, kissing my cheek again. "Love you." "Love you too," I replied automatically, and hated myself for how easily the lie came. After he left, Toby returned through the back door, his expression serious. That was close. Too close. My hands were shaking as I set down my coffee cup. "This is insane. We can't keep doing this." "Then what do you want to do?" The question hung between us like a challenge. What did I want to do? Continue sneaking around like teenagers, constructing elaborate deceptions, living in constant fear of discovery? The thought exhausted me. "I need space to think," I said. "Some distance. Maybe you should find somewhere else to stay for a few days." Something flickered across Toby's face, disappointment, perhaps, or something more calculating. "If that's what you want." "It's what I need." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. What I needed was him. What I needed was the woman I became in his presence. What I needed was to stop living this careful, controlled life and start living authentically. That afternoon, as I tried to focus on my clients, I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. Mrs. Patterson called to cancel her appointment. She was taking a weekend trip with her husband, she said, the first spontaneous thing they'd done in years. Another client, a man whose wife had left him for emotional abandonment, spent the session talking about all the signs he'd missed, all the moments when he could have chosen differently. "The hardest part," he said, "is knowing that I could have fought for her. But I was so comfortable, so sure she'd always be there, that I stopped seeing her as a person with her own needs and dreams." His words hit me like a physical blow. Was that what I was doing to David? Taking his devotion for granted while I explored my own desires? By the time I got home, Toby had packed his single suitcase and was waiting in the living room. The sight of his bag by the door filled me with unexpected grief. "I found a hotel downtown," he said. "I can stay there until I figure out what's next." "Okay." I wanted to ask him what he thought was next, wanted to know if this was goodbye or just a pause. Instead, I stood there feeling like I was losing something I hadn't known I could lose. "Laura," he said, his voice gentle. "This doesn't have to be the end of anything. It can just be the beginning of you figuring out what you really want." David came home early, surprising me with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. Thought we could have a quiet evening, he said, setting up our impromptu dinner on the coffee table. Just the two of us. It feels like we haven't talked in weeks. He was right. We'd been living parallel lives even before Toby arrived, but his presence had made our distance more apparent. Now, sitting across from David in our living room, I felt like I was looking at a stranger, a kind, well-meaning stranger who loved a version of me that no longer existed. "How's Toby settling in?" David asked, serving me pad thai from the cardboard container. "He's gone," I said. "Found a hotel downtown. Said he needed more space to process everything." David nodded thoughtfully. "Probably for the best. I was worried about him becoming too dependent on our hospitality. He needs to rebuild his life, not hide from it." The irony was suffocating. Here was David, worrying about Toby's emotional health while I was the one hiding from my real life. "David," I said suddenly. "Are you happy? With us, I mean. With our marriage." He looked up from his food, surprised by the directness of the question. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're going through the motions. Like we're more like roommates than husband and wife." "That's just what happens after 20 years, he said. "The passion settles into something deeper. More stable." "But what if I don't want stable?" The words came out before I could stop them. David set down his fork, his expression concerned. "What are you saying, Laura?" I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a man who genuinely cared about my happiness but had no idea how to access it. He was offering me stability, security, the comfortable predictability of a life well lived. What he couldn't offer was the electricity I'd felt with Toby, the sense of possibility, the feeling of being fully alive. "I'm saying that maybe we should talk more. About what we want. About who we are now, not who we were 20 years ago." "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's talk." But as we sat there trying to bridge 20 years of gradual disconnect, I realized that some distances couldn't be crossed with good intentions alone. David was trying. I could see the effort in his eyes, hear it in his careful questions about my work, my dreams, my concerns. But it felt like he was speaking a language I no longer understood. Later that night, lying in bed beside my husband, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine my future. I could see two paths stretching ahead of me. One led back to the woman I'd been, competent, respectable, safely married to a good man who would never surprise me again. The other led into uncertainty, toward a version of myself I was only beginning to discover. The safe choice was obvious. End whatever this was with Toby, recommit to my marriage, return to the comfortable numbness that had sustained me for so long. But as I listened to David's steady breathing beside me, all I could think about was Toby's question, "When was the last time you surprised yourself?" I had my answer now. Last night. And the night before. And every moment I'd spent discovering who I could be when I stopped being so careful, so controlled, so afraid of my own desires. The question was, what was I going to do with that knowledge? The next morning brought an email that changed everything. I was in my office reviewing notes when my assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Morrison? There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." A woman I didn't recognize stood in my waiting room, mid-30s, professionally dressed, with the kind of brittle composure that suggested she was holding herself together by force of will alone. "Dr. Morrison? My name is Sarah Richardson. I believe you know my husband." The world tilted beneath my feet. Sarah. Toby's ex-wife. The woman whose yoga instructor had allegedly destroyed their marriage. She was supposed to be in California, living her new life with her new love. "I'm sorry," I managed. "I think there's been some confusion." "No confusion," she said, her voice steady but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "May we speak privately?" I led her into my office on unsteady legs, my mind racing through possibilities. What was she doing here? What did she know? "Would you like some tea? Water?" "I'd like you to listen," she said, settling into the chair my clients usually occupied. "And then I'd like you to help me figure out how to save your marriage." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I don't understand." "Toby isn't divorced," she said quietly. "We're separated, yes. Have been for 6 months. But there's no yoga instructor, no final papers, no broken heart. There's just a man who's become very good at finding women to fill the emotional void he refuses to address himself." My hands gripped the arms of my chair so tightly my knuckles went white. "That's impossible." "He showed me." "What did he show you? Papers? Photos? Or just his considerable charm and a story designed to make you feel sorry for him?" I tried to remember what concrete evidence I'd seen of Toby's divorce. David's phone calls with him. His single suitcase. His sadness. But none of that proved anything except that he was a man who traveled light and could perform emotions convincingly. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because 3 months ago, he pulled the same thing with a therapist in Denver. Before that, a social worker in Phoenix. He has a pattern, Dr. Morrison. He finds successful women in committed relationships and tells them exactly what they need to hear to feel alive again." The room seemed to be shrinking around me. "How did you find me?" "Credit card charges. A hotel in your town, meals at expensive restaurants. When Toby starts spending money on dining and lodging, I've learned it means he's found someone new." Sarah leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but determined. "I hired a private investigator. Your husband doesn't know, but Toby's been very careful about his schedule. Gone during your husband's work hours, back before he comes home. Very respectful of boundaries, I'm sure." I thought I might be sick. Every moment with Toby was suddenly suspect, every conversation, every touch, every word of understanding that had made me feel so seen, so special. Had any of it been real? "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to help me understand why he keeps doing this. Why he keeps destroying good marriages to fill whatever emptiness is inside him." Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "Because despite everything, I still love the man I married. And I think somewhere underneath all this manipulation, he might still exist." I stared at her, this woman whose life had been as thoroughly disrupted by Toby as mine was about to be. She was beautiful in the way I'd expected, refined features, careful grooming, the kind of effortless style that suggested money and breeding. But there were shadows under her eyes and a tremor in her hands that spoke to months of uncertainty and pain. "How many others?" I asked. "That I know of?" "4, including you." "That he's admitted to?" "None. 4 women. 4 marriages. 4 carefully constructed deceptions designed to make lonely wives feel special, desired, understood." "He's very good at reading people," Sarah continued. "At knowing exactly what they're missing and positioning himself as the solution. With you, I'm guessing it was intellectual connection. Someone who saw past your professional competence to the woman underneath." It was so accurate it hurt. "How did you know?" "Because that's what he offered me when we first met. I was a recent MBA working 80-hour weeks, trying to prove myself in a male-dominated industry. He made me feel like I didn't have to be strong all the time, like I could be vulnerable and still be valued. And now? Now I realize that vulnerability became dependence, and dependence became this endless need for validation that he can only meet by finding it elsewhere." I looked at Sarah Richardson and saw my possible future, a woman slowly rebuilding her sense of self after discovering that the man she'd loved was nothing more than a skilled performer. But I also saw something else, strength. Despite everything, she was here, fighting for her marriage, trying to understand rather than simply condemn. What do you want me to do? I want you to help me confront him. Together. I think if he sees the pattern of damage he's causing, if he has to face two of his victims at the same time, maybe it will break through whatever wall he's built around his conscience. The word victim stung, but I couldn't deny its accuracy. I had been victimized, not just by Toby's deception, but by my own willingness to believe that someone could see me so clearly, understand me so completely, after knowing me for such a short time. He's at the Marriott downtown, I said. Room 412. I know. Will you come with me? I thought about David, probably in some conference room right now, fighting for his clients while his wife planned to confront the man who had systematically dismantled their marriage. I thought about my afternoon appointments, the couples counting on me to help them navigate their relationship crises while I was drowning in my own. Yes, I said. But first, I need to make some calls. As I canceled my afternoon, I felt like I was preparing for surgery, the kind of necessary procedure that would hurt terribly but might ultimately save the patient's life. Because that's what my marriage was now, a patient in critical condition, whose survival depended on my willingness to excise the infection before it spread beyond repair. The question was whether there would be anything left to save when the operation was over. The drive to the Marriott felt like a funeral procession, two women united by betrayal, heading toward a confrontation that would change everything. Sarah sat in my passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap with the careful composure of someone who had been through this before. Are you nervous? I asked as we pulled into the hotel parking garage. Terrified, she admitted. But I've learned that the anticipation is always worse than the reality. Whatever happens up there, at least we'll finally know the truth. We rode the elevator to the 4th floor in silence. Outside room 412, I paused with my hand raised to knock. What if he runs? I asked. What if he just packs up and disappears? Then we'll know that too, Sarah said. And maybe that's enough. I knocked 3 times, firm and deliberate. Through the door, I heard movement, footsteps, the sound of someone checking the peephole. A long pause. Laura. Toby's voice was cautious, confused. What are you doing here? Open the door, Toby. We need to talk. Another pause, then the sound of locks disengaging. The door opened to reveal Toby Richardson as I'd never seen him before, rumpled, unshaven, wearing yesterday's clothes. For just a moment, he looked genuinely vulnerable. Then his eyes moved past me to Sarah, and his expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Hello, darling, Sarah said, her voice steady. Surprise. Sarah. He stepped back, allowing us into the room. I can explain. Can you? I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Because I'd love to hear an explanation that makes sense of the last 2 weeks. The hotel room was generic in the way that all business travel accommodations are: beige walls, corporate art, furniture designed to be inoffensive and forgettable. But it felt charged with tension as the 3 of us arranged ourselves in an awkward triangle, Toby on the edge of the bed, Sarah in the desk chair, me standing by the window like I might need to escape. How long have you been married? I asked. 18 years, he said quietly. Not divorced. No. Not divorced. Not even separated, really, Sarah added. Just a man who needed space to figure himself out, apparently. I looked at Toby, really looked at him, and tried to reconcile the man who had made me feel so alive with this stranger who had orchestrated such an elaborate deception. Why? I asked. I don't know, he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely lost. I honestly don't know. That's not good enough, Sarah said. Not anymore. Do you have any idea what you've done to this woman? To her marriage? To mine? Toby's shoulders sagged. I never meant for it to go this far. But you did mean for it to go somewhere, I said. You planned this. The story about your divorce, the timing of your arrival, the way you positioned yourself as the wounded man in need of healing. None of it was accidental. No, he admitted. It wasn't. How many others? I asked, though Sarah had already told me. You don't want to know. Yes, I do. How many marriages have you interfered with? How many women have you convinced that they were special, that you understood them in ways their husbands never could? Too many. The admission hung in the air like smoke. I sat down heavily in the room's single armchair, feeling like all the energy had drained out of my body. Everything I'd felt over the past 2 weeks, the excitement, the sense of being truly seen, the conviction that I was experiencing something rare and meaningful, all of it had been manufactured. I was just another Mark, another lonely wife whose vulnerabilities had been expertly identified and exploited. What do you get out of it? Sarah asked. The thrill of the conquest? The ego boost of making someone fall for you? I get to feel necessary, Toby said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a little while, I get to be the most important thing in someone's world. And when that feeling fades, I move on. The casual brutality of it took my breath away. Do you care at all about the damage you leave behind? I tell myself that I'm showing women what they're missing. That I'm doing them a favor by waking them up to their own desires. That's bullshit, I said, anger finally cutting through the numbness. You're not a catalyst for anyone's self-discovery. You're a parasite. Toby winced but didn't argue. The question is, Sarah said, what happens now? Do you just disappear again? Find another town, another target? I don't want to anymore, he said, and something in his voice made me look up. I'm tired, Sarah. I'm tired of running, tired of lying, tired of destroying things. Then stop, she said simply. It's not that easy. Yes, it is. You choose to stop, and then you do the work to figure out why you started in the first place. I stood up, suddenly needing distance from both of them. I have to go. My husband will be home soon, and I need to figure out how to explain this to him. Laura, Toby said, standing as well. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much, but I need you to know that some of it was real. The way you made me feel, the conversations we had. Stop, I said, holding up my hand. Just stop. I can't do this right now. In the hallway, waiting for the elevator, Sarah touched my arm gently. Are you going to tell David? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. I looked at her, this woman who had traveled across the country to save her marriage and mine. What about you? Are you going to try to work things out with Toby? I don't know either. But I know I can't keep living in limbo, wondering when he's going to disappear again. The elevator arrived, and we rode down together in contemplative silence. In the parking garage, she hugged me, an unexpected gesture that brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, she said. For listening. For coming with me. For not slamming the door in my face. Thank you for stopping this before I destroyed everything. Driving home, I tried to prepare myself for the conversation I was about to have with David. But as I pulled into our driveway, I realized I still didn't know what I was going to say. How do you explain that you'd been so ready to betray 20 years of trust that you'd fallen for the first man who paid attention to your hidden desires? David was in the kitchen when I walked in, already starting dinner. He looked up with a smile that made my heart ache. Perfect timing. I was just about to call you. How was your day? I stood in the doorway, looking at my husband, really looking at him, for what felt like the first time in months. He wasn't exciting. He didn't challenge me or surprise me or make me feel dangerously alive. But he was kind and steady and had loved me faithfully for 20 years, even when I'd forgotten how to love him back. David, I said. We need to talk. He set down his knife and turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his eyes that suggested he'd been waiting for this conversation longer than I'd realized. I know, he said quietly. I've been waiting for you to be ready. And just like that, I understood that the real surprise wasn't going to be learning something new about David. It was going to be discovering what he already knew about me.